I should have watched the new Charlie Kaufman movie because I'm seriously thinking about ending things. Instead of watching any of the great movies on Netflix, I decided to watch Mignonnes, or as it's called here, Cuties. So I went into this thing with probably the most objective viewpoint possible. Let me explain. We're gonna go all the way back to the beginning of this controversy, which was like 3 weeks ago. This thing dropped in the coming soon section of Netflix, and people are rightfully outraged. An 11-year-old joining a twerking dance group is not something most people would be eager to watch. Now, I was going to join in by posting a tweet that said, "I'd rather watch Cannibal Holocaust again than this." I didn't end up posting that tweet, but I wish I did, because it does play in nicely to what I'm trying to say about this movie. The reason I didn't post that was because I'm pretty aware of movie controversies. We had one not long ago with Joker. I looked into what was written about the movie prior to the outrage, and it really seemed like it was just a fuck up on Netflix's part. So I stayed quiet and watched the outrage unfold. Interestingly enough, I saw a lot of the same people who were critical of the outrage over Joker fall into the same pitfalls and behaviors. I was ready to call it the hypocrisy in so many people. And I can't. Because the movie is dog shit. So quick summary of the plot. Amy is an immigrant who moves into one of the poorest neighborhoods in Paris. We quickly establish how she feels her religion is oppressing her. Her family life is also pretty rough. She meets her neighbor and joins her dance group. At some point, one of the girls has a falling out, because of course they do, and they leave the group. So now Amy is added, at which point they start incorporating more sexual dances into their choreography. They try out for the dance competition and eventually get in. Amy then has a fight with another group of older competing dancers because they think her group is too young and naive. This humiliating event causes her to, I'm not exaggerating here, post a nude of herself on social media. Her friends kick her out of the group, but she sabotages one of the other girls to get herself back in. She dances at the finals and suddenly realizes that what she's doing is wrong and runs away. Throughout this whole story, her and her mother have been fighting, but now her mother sort of accepts her as she is. The movie ends with her rejecting both her religious clothing and her sexual clothing in favor of just regular jeans and a shirt, showing us her change as a character, or something. From unlikable characters to gratuitous ass shots, this movie is pretty fucking terrible. And the worst part is, it doesn't have to be. There are aspects about this film that are actually well done. You might even catch a pattern. First off, the opening is really strong. It quickly establishes how her Islamic religion and culture suppress her. It's a feeling that I think many can relate to, especially women who come from a culture where wives are supposed to be obedient. This is followed up by another great scene where her mother is telling family members that her husband, Amy's father, is marrying a second wife. Her culture demands her to be grateful and accepting of the whole scenario, but in private, she's distraught.
T'as appris une deuxième femme? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Much later in the film, the family has prepared food for the husband's second wedding. Amy is forced to do all the manual labor by her aunt as a way of teaching her to be an obedient wife. It's an excessive amount of food, which Amy is unsurprisingly upset about. Finally, on the day of the wedding, Amy catches the bride in her gown, a huge white robe covering her entire body and face. Despite being drenched in white, the scene has a very sinister tone to it. Amy runs out of the apartment terrified because this very well could be her own future. And those are pretty much all the scenes that I thought were good, and they all have one thing in common. There's no twerking. So now we get to talk about the rest of the film. To illustrate why I don't like this movie, I'm going to list every single scene I think is bad that I can remember. Right from the get-go, with the first girl we see dance, there is a close-up on, you know. And this is a problem throughout the movie. Each dance sequence is filled with close-ups and they always feel unnecessary. I'm not just talking about the close-ups, but the sequences themselves. A lot of the time they just come out of nowhere and are pretty much used as transitions from one day to the next. You could cut a majority of them out of the film and lose nothing of value. And yes, they twerk a lot in this movie. But the dancing isn't even the worst part about this. I mean, it is, but like, there's other things too. There's a scene where Amy tries to film a boy while he's using a urinal in an attempt to get a shot of, you know. When Amy fights the opposing dance group, her pants are pulled down, and of course the film does a close-up on that. One scene has a girl inflate a condom she found in the woods because she thinks it's a balloon. Once again, this scene is literally just a transition from one location to the other. Was there no other way to do this? As I mentioned before, Amy posted a nude of herself on social media, which we see her do, and yes, it was very uncomfortable to watch. And the final dance performance is the worst. There was twerking and grabbing each other's crotches, and I don't know what else because I just looked away at that point. Now, I'm of the opinion that you can show whatever you want on screen so long as it has a meaningful purpose. I'm no stranger to films that use shocking imagery to get a point across. What differentiates these films is that they focus on content and not the form of what's being presented. Cuties does the complete opposite and instead focuses on imagery that makes the audience uncomfortable and less about what it's trying to say about it. To put it simply, Cuties is a movie that has a message that most people would agree with. However, its hyper-focus on shocking imagery overshadows what it's trying to say. Essentially, it becomes what it's critiquing, which reminds me heavily of something else. Honestly, the feelings I got from Cuties are the same feelings I got from Cannibal Holocaust. And no, I'm not a weirdo who actually likes Cannibal Holocaust, so this is not a good thing. Some may not know this, but there's actually a side plot to the movie that basically attacks the media for their obsession with violence for ratings. A little ironic considering what it's known for. The key difference here is that Cannibal Holocaust kind of relishes in its violence and gore. It deliberately wants to be controversial. I don't get that impression from Cuties. It appears that they were really trying to tackle a serious subject, but that there were just severe miscalculations from all fronts. You know, I can't even give them that, because there are so many close-ups. At a certain point, someone has to speak up and say, hey, maybe this is not a great idea. Now, I've seen defenses for this film basically saying it's a well-done critique of the sexualization in the industry. And that if you're uncomfortable with children being targets, then you should also be uncomfortable with women being targets. That can be a valid point, but I truly think there were much better ways of getting this point across without the need of close-ups. In fact, I know there were better ways of tackling this issue because I've seen them in one of my favorite films. Alright, so minor spoilers for Perfect Blue if you haven't seen it. I highly recommend it. Alright, 3, 2, 1. Perfect Blue is a layered film tackling a lot of different concepts, one of which is the sexualization of women. The main character, Mima, is transitioning from being a pop idol to an actress. During her time as an actress, she's had to take on very questionable roles, one of which is acting out a very gruesome rape scene for a show. During a photo shoot, she is told to continue taking off more clothes until she's just outright naked. All of this takes a toll on her. She tells herself she wants to be an actress, but she really just wants to be a singer again. She realizes that she's being exploited, and she hates it, but is unable to really stop it. Even when the film decides to emphasize sexual scenes, there's still a purpose to it. This scene of Mima stripping is symbolic of her drastic shift in innocence. It's a point of no return for her. There is nothing like this in Cuties. The excessive dance sequences don't reveal anything. There's no layers to it, it's just there. Perfect Blue is honestly way more graphic than Cuties, but there's much more meaning behind what the film is showing. The real kicker here is that these are both directorial debuts. Cuties is a misguided and pathetic attempt at dealing with a child exploitation problem. A very real problem, mind you. It takes a very superficial look into the lives of underage girls and ultimately says very little. The only aspect it gets right is the idea of straying away from established religious and cultural beliefs. But at what cost? This movie wasn't worth the watch, nor was it even worth the resources to make it. So I used to have this video where I analyzed bad reviews of Whiplash. I ended up unlisting it because I didn't like how it turned out. In that video, I analyzed an article by Richard Brody where I felt he just didn't understand the film at all. Come to find out, 1, that he's still alive, and 2, that he's made an article defending Cuties. Stay having bad takes, you fucking dick.